Welcome, everyone. I'm Ann Petrick, Vice President of Research at Vistage Worldwide, and I'm happy to host the latest webinar in our Peak Performer webinar series. This series is designed to support your leadership climb by bringing the most trusted experts to the Vistage community. Experts who provide exceptional insight and best practices, helping you navigate new challenges and possibilities. Now, with the uncertainty that is facing small and mid-sized businesses, confidence is declining. In fact, our latest CEO Confidence Index survey revealed that CEO confidence is at levels recorded at the depths of the pandemic. And while inflation, supply chain challenges, rising interest rates, and stalling customer demand are all challenges that small businesses are facing, talent management, inclusive of hiring, retention, and employee development, are top areas of focus for CEOs. Today's session is presented by Insperity, who offers comprehensive, scalable solutions beyond just HR outsourcing. With an optimal blend of service and technology, they help facilitate growth by streamlining processes related to payroll, benefits, talent management, and HR compliance. With the tools they provide to help you lighten your administrative load, maximize productivity, and manage risks, you can focus on growth. And while Insperity can help with your challenges related to talent, the one thing CEOs need to focus on is perseverance and resilience to manage these changes for both yourself and your workforce. That's why we've invited today's presenter, Dr. Maureen Orey. Maureen is an Insperity partner and the founder and CEO of Workplace Learning and Performance Group, a boutique corporate training and consulting firm based in San Diego. She is passionate about helping individuals and organizations be more resilient by facilitating high-impact leadership development, strategic planning, and organizational development. Maureen is a certified professional in talent development and holds a doctorate in organizational leadership, a master's degree in education, and a bachelor's degree in psychology. With that tremendous expertise, we are very much looking forward to what you're going to share today. Welcome, Maureen, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Anne. I appreciate the introduction, and it's great to be with you and be with everyone here today. Thanks for joining us. Happy Friday. And so our focus today, it's called Even a Duck Can Drown. It's a little dark, perhaps, for a Friday morning, but we'll actually look at how do we transform some of the challenges into being able to, as I like to say, stay afloat, right? And we're going to connect the lessons on how ducks get their waterproofing, perhaps, and what we can learn from nature on how to stay afloat. So the session is really inspired by nature. It's informed by the science of resilience. And we're going to look first at how do we define resilience. And I've been speaking and writing about resilience for over a decade now. And it continues to be a really important topic. We'll look at what are some of those characteristics that enable us to be resilient, to help others be resilient, and discover some keys to build your personal and professional resilience, because it is a little bit about both. Some people ask me, why ducks? And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. And so when we first look at how do we define resilience, right? Defining resilience is, I like to say, when I look at defining resilience, it takes purposeful action to build resilience in order to stay afloat. We're not born resilient. Ducks aren't hatched waterproof, and they need to develop their waterproofing and their capacity to stay afloat. I bet you didn't know that even a duck can drown, and there'll be more information about that coming up. So resilience, one of my favorite definitions of resilience, comes from one of the first authors on resilience, and it's Maston and Garmsey. They said the process of the capacity for or outcome of successful adaptation despite challenging or threatening circumstances. Have you had any challenging or threatening circumstances over the last few years? It seems to be relentless, right? And so we're going to explore this. Here's the context, though. The model I created, I call the Stay Afloat model. The Stay Afloat model has 6 components, and it's all based on how ducks get their waterproofing. And we're going to start with, first of all, the short story. My family, I have 3 children. My husband has 2. So between us, there are 5 children. Growing up, our maximum pet capacity at one point was 22 animals. We live in East County in San Diego. And so we had ducks, we had chickens, guinea pigs, hamster, dogs, cats, and I think the requisite goldfish. And the lesson, though, was about, I ended up adopting 2 ducks from the neighbor kids. They actually had seen us with chickens, and they wanted to have some cool animals in their backyard. They went to the feed store, and they actually adopted a couple of ducks. So they come home, they've got these little ducks, baby ducks. And interestingly, as soon as they got home, their 2 golden retrievers were super interested in those ducks. The little girls hadn't quite connected the fact that their golden retrievers were bird dogs, and they thought they just brought lunch home. So anyway, the whole story of how we got connected to ducks is these little girls come down and they have their 2 baby ducks, and they said, "Hey, Maureen, can you babysit our ducks for us?" And I immediately knew that was a lifetime commitment. It wasn't just a couple hours of watching baby ducks. And so the process began. So the first lesson that I learned, though, I went to the feed shop and I asked the Dave and Sherry from Dave's Feed in Lemon Grove, California. They own that feed store for 45 years. And they said, first of all, don't get a pond. I'm thinking, why not get a pond? And they said, because baby ducks aren't hatched waterproof. If you get a pond, they get in there, they're going to soak up the water and they won't be able to get out of the water. So don't get a pond. They said, interestingly, that baby ducks need their mother in order to get preened and get prepared for being in the water. So that connection is the first key. And we're going to go deeper on that. The lesson of the duck is also about adaptation. When they become adult ducks, they develop a preening gland. That's a little sac of oil that they don't get till they're an adult duck. So the adaptation is important. Then the application, having that oil is not enough. Being able to apply that is really important in order for the duck to stay afloat. And then we look at balance. Interestingly, as I was doing research on ducks, which was kind of an accidental thing that happened, I was speaking to an aviculture specialist at SeaWorld here in San Diego. And the aviculture specialist said, not just baby ducks can drown, adult ducks can drown if they don't have access to clean water. Thought that was interesting. So it's a little bit about balance. That's the lesson for us. And then we look at perseverance or grit or stamina and kind of that duck going across the water, paddling his feet off. It's that grit and perseverance that is part of resilience, but it's not all of resilience. And the final one is really about instinct. How do we listen to the voice in our head? So that's an introduction to the whole model, and we'll be going deeper on each of those components. So the first lesson is about connection. Connection, and interestingly, connection is intuitive. People need connection. Ducks need the connection. It's that mother that prepares the baby duck for going into the water. And what happens, though, is that the mother has that preening gland. The preening gland is full of oil, and she prepares the ducks to go into water. If you think of out there in nature, you see cute little fuzzy baby ducks, and you see sleek and shiny mother ducks. The difference is the oil that's on their feather. But the lesson for us is truly about connection. What are we doing to connect with others, to support others? We strive and we thrive in well-coordinated groups, just like you often see duck videos out there of the mother and the baby ducks. It's that connection that really helps us to build our resilience. And when you think about what are you doing for your employees to give them opportunities for connection. Here at Insperity, one of the things we do on the service team there is we have a Thursday afternoon, what we call yappy hour, or a HR company. So we don't have happy hour. It's virtual, but we call it a yappy hour, and it's just no agenda. It's a half hour, 45 minutes at the end of the week for the team to connect. And it's a great way for us to just debrief the week, chat about what's going on in life, and it keeps that connection going on a weekly basis because we're still kind of virtual in many ways. So the next lesson really is about adaptation. And so I want you to think about what happens is the ducks get that preening gland. That preening gland is a little sac of oil at the base of their tail. And as I said earlier, they don't get that till they are an adult duck. So they adapt, they grow, they change, they develop new resources. And what we have to do is also have that willingness to adapt, have that willingness to create new resources. When we look at some of the predictors of resilience, how can we make sure that people are resilient, that we're resilient, that our employees are resilient, as we look at that psychological flexibility. Just as physical flexibility, people who do yoga denotes physical health and stamina, for example. Psychological flexibility also is an indicator of mental health. It's robust, healthy systems that are always going to be more resilient. And so looking at the psychological flexibility of your team, of yourself, how can people adapt? Can we go with the flow as needed? And that's a really important component to being able to predict perhaps people who are more resilient. One of the other components when we look at adapting and creating are some components for resilience is psychological hardiness. Psychological hardiness is really the ability to assess stressors, right? Can we look at what's going on in our lives, reflect, can we understand what's the impact, right? Can we act on things with courage and purpose? It says here, transforming potential calamity into opportunity. What's interesting, and when you look at the research on psychology, it's the individuals who have had an easy life. They were perhaps, for lack of a better term, born with a platinum spoon in their mouth. They haven't wanted for anything. They haven't had to work for much. They've been perhaps even coddled or taken care of just a little too much in their life. Interestingly, the individuals who have not had to encounter challenge and stress and perhaps significant hardship often tends to be more at risk for not being resilient in their adult life. Children who have had challenges on the average can bounce back and be more resilient as adults. And so it's looking at that psychological hardiness. We start to learn that as children. And sometimes it's our mindset. How do we look at adaptation? How do we look at what's going on in the workplace, in our businesses? Are we having conversations about, man, this is really tough. We just lost a huge contract. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to adapt? What are our options? And having that conversation really helps build that psychological hardiness as well. So when you think about that adaptation, that's an important part of building your resilience. Also, what's interesting though, if you think about the duck and the artwork, I have to give a shout out to my child, Sophia. She created all of this artwork over the last decade or so. And as I was looking at the concept of application, so ducks have this sac of oil that they develop as an adult. Developing that sac of oil, developing those resources, developing our psychological hardiness and our flexibility and our ability to adapt is only part of it. It's the application of it is really important as well. So this is the duck going shopping. Actually, the duck going shopping is right here, right? They're looking for that sac of oil and they're having to develop something new, find a new resource for them to adapt. And then when we look at that application, the application is every single day, every single feather. The ducks are always preening themselves. So when you see them out in nature, they're kind of picking at themselves. They're not picking off bugs like monkeys do. What they're doing is they're taking oil and then they're applying it to every feather every day. And so when we think about the the floaty there, the life preserver, is representative of the oil. It's representative of taking purposeful action in order to stay afloat. So the application really comes down to starting to look at habits, right? There's loads of books. I've got a couple books. I've got The Power of Habit right here on my bookshelf that I've been reading, Atomic Habits. There's loads and loads of content out there about habits right now. But when you think about the application piece of it, whether it's taking a class, learning a new skill, taking a class isn't enough. You've got to take a class and then you've got to practice. You've got to implement that and really utilize habits or change, make better habits. So we need to take action. We need to be a problem solver. I can't help but think of during the pandemic, when it first hit, I had a huge contract in my own business with a large aerospace company. That was a global aerospace company. My contract was up for renewal in 2020. And it wasn't renewed. It was a large six-figure contract, and it has had a huge impact on my business. And what I noticed actually, after losing that contract, COVID hits, the business is really struggling. One of the things I started to do in order to take care of myself and my mental health was actually looking at meditation. Right. And I use the Daily Calm app. I do 10 minutes a day just to start my day. And it's a habit I've really tried to continue to implement. So I'd ask you, what are the habits you have that help you build your resilience? It might seem counterintuitive to say, hey, your business is struggling. You've lost a huge contract. You're going to go meditate, really? And yes, you've got to take care of you, right? You've got to be able to create positive habits that get you through those difficult times. Part of that is that psychological hardiness we talked about, but it's really about taking action, creating practices and developing skills that help us get through the challenging times. And whether that's a yappy hour with a team, or that's daily meditation, or going for a walk or a run, or whatever your methodology is in order to create some positive habits. Maybe the habit is daily, weekly, monthly planning so you can stay focused on your goals and your strategies. Well, another habit of resilience is really problem solving, right? Looking at how can you solve problems differently. It says on the slide here, carry the problems well. Might seem weird. Don't carry your backpack with your teeth. If you think about so many people, I don't know about you, but I've met people that just wear their problems like a badge of honor, and they talk to everyone about all of the problems and all of the challenges they have in life. I don't know if that's necessarily carrying those problems well, right? Is if you've got a backpack full of problems, yeah, you got to put that backpack on. You've got to make sure you deal with them as best you can, but you don't necessarily need to carry them incorrectly, right? Maybe share your problems or reach out for guidance and assistance and build that community that helps you get through your particular challenges. So one of the, I'd encourage you to put any comments or questions that you have into the Q&A, and think about what are the habits you can create for your team. Are there daily checkpoints? Are there weekly checkpoints? Are there tools and resources, whether it be letting them know about the employee assistance program, having a conversation, a heart-to-heart conversation, and creating that habit of open and strong communication can be a really important component of positive habits that really help your team be more resilient. The next lesson is about perseverance. Now, this is the duck swimming across the water. It was actually the last component I added to the model. And Angela Duckworth has done loads of research about grit, right? Grit is an important component of resilience. And so grit and perseverance is connected. It's not the only thing. In fact, one of the things I like to say is that it takes more than grit to stay afloat, right? it's yes, we need tenacity. Yes, we need perseverance. And yes, we need grit. And one of my favorite examples of a person who really practiced grit and tenacity in order to be resilient. In fact, had coffee with her recently, a very dear friend of mine. I formerly in my career, I worked as a career coach for individuals with disabilities at the local university. And this individual is legally blind, and she shared so many challenges with me about trying to find a job and all the assumptions people made about trying to find a job. She is a certified contract specialist and had to take a certification exam. And interestingly, she said she came into the exam room and they noticed that she had a dog and that she was legally blind. She uses magnification software in order to see a computer screen. And they said, oh, well, we're going to give you extra time because of your disability. And she says, no, I don't want extra time. She was pretty perseverant. She's really still today has a lot of grit and tenacity. And she realized, though, she says, okay, I'll take the extra time, but I'm not going to use it, right? I want to be held equal to everyone else. And she's maybe a bit stubborn as well when you think about the messages that she kept receiving. She was bound and determined to be successful and to overcome her disability. And she ended up getting that contract certification, getting a job with the Navy, and really being able to now, 10 years later, pay off her condo. She's working successfully and now thinking about retirement. And she has been utilizing that skill of grit and tenacity. And she and I have had many conversations, like back to that concept of connection, in order to, when it's challenging, having someone to talk to, right? So here's some perspectives about grit and tenacity. One of the things I encourage people to do when you look at grit and tenacity is widen your perspective, right? Stress tends to narrow our perspective. And I don't know if I'm sure you've felt this. I certainly have. When you're feeling overwhelmed with stress, and your mind is full. You're not mindful. Your mind is actually full of stuff and stress and projects and deadlines and challenges. And when you think about how stress narrows our perspective, it impacts our ability to focus, right? It distorts the problem. We kind of make a mountain out of a molehill. And so if you were to widen your perspective, step away from the challenge, take a deep breath, use some of those coping mechanisms for grit and tenacity, and but put things in proper perspective, right? In order to cope and develop your coping skills, really it's looking at how do you assess your situation from perhaps a broader perspective, a different perspective, right? Evaluate the events that are happening in life, and really essentially do an assessment of what's going on, what are the challenges you're facing. In fact, I remember when I first started my business many years ago, I started my business in January of 2009, right in the middle of the Great Recession. I had contracts and projects in place to have a fantastic year. I was super excited. I was a single mother of 3, and I was strategically, I didn't get fired and start a business. I purposefully quit my job and launched my business right before that great recession. And so halfway through that first year in corporate training and development, right? Corporations often cut budgets for training and consulting and coaching and so forth. So my house actually I was about 90 days 60 to 90 days away from losing my house. My house was in default. Contracts had fallen apart. The things were not looking good. And thinking about perspective, I went to my kitchen window and I look out my kitchen window and I'm thinking, okay, this is challenging. Contracts are lost. Projects are challenged. And I have 3 children counting on me in my business. And one of the things to consider, actually, one just knocked on the door. Hold on a sec. They're grown now. But anyway, I sat there thinking, okay, Wells Fargo is not going to send Guido to my door and break my kneecaps today, right? Wells Fargo, I don't think does that in general, but that's who my mortgage was with. And I was just had to take a deep breath and center myself and think, all right, how can I persevere through this challenge? Do I look for a job? Do I find more contracts? And then I ended up deciding to just be more purposeful, creating a positive habit about networking and planning and reaching out. And I decided that I could get projects to get me through the year as opposed to perhaps finding it. There were no jobs to be had at that point in time here in San Diego. But it was really taking that time to assess the reality of my situation. Yes, it was challenging and I could get through, right, if I had some good strategies in place. So the last thing there with the pair of shoes there is like, observe your thinking. Never buy that first, when we walk into a shoe store, we don't buy the first pair of shoes that we walk into. It might not be our size, our style, our color, whatever. And the same thing goes for when we encounter challenges. Never just take that first thought in your head when you're looking at problem solving. Never take that first thought in your head. Really, it's assessing what's all of the different things that are going on in your life in order to, or in your business, in your employees' lives, in order to make sure that you can keep proper perspective. Success at the end of the day, of course, in my opinion, depends on our resources, right? Developing new resources, applying your resources, and then really thinking about how should we look at not just our own individual development, and how can we focus solely on resilience, bigger picture, attempts at increasing resilience. Really, it's not just about us. It's not just about your inner strength. That's part of it. It's not just about mental toughness, but it's also about utilizing all of the resources that you have available to you. And we need to really look at, for our employees, investing our resources to build supportive environments, whether it be systems or processes or practices, so we can create a condition where people can be successful, people can be more resilient. Acknowledge the fact that COVID is in what, the 5th generation, 6th generation of this darned illness, this pandemic, and it's tough, right? Acknowledge that and talk to your team about how can we create an environment to help people be resilient. What is it that your team needs, right? So whether it be reducing the number, the severity of some risk factors, allowing for people to manage risks successfully, because risk mitigation is really important, right? And having that conversation about the risk factors, about the challenges that we're facing it's really important to utilize our resources effectively and talk about them. And working together is what will help us be more successful. The next component is about balance. As I shared with you at the beginning, the aviculture specialist I was speaking to said, because I wanted to have proof of concept on this whole model of, yes, even a duck can drown, and so I'm speaking to this professional, and I says, okay, yes, baby ducks can drown. I mean, granted, the woman at the feed store had only been doing that 45 years. She was pretty well versed in animals and so forth, but I still wanted to verify this concept with a bird specialist. Interestingly, what he said was, not just baby ducks can drown. Adult ducks can drown if they don't have access to clean water. If they don't have a clean and healthy environment, they can lose their capacity for waterproofing and still drown. And we see examples of that with oil spills out in nature and and Dawn dishwashing liquid, right? We see ducks and other waterfowl that get washed to remove too much oil, right? Because too much oil can make them drown. But really the message for us that we take from this model is that we need balance, right? We need to take care of ourselves in order to stay afloat. And here's some interesting research on resilience is how we react to adversity, how we survive different challenges. There's kind of that normal bell curve. We have PTSD on one side, or PTS. Now it's just post-traumatic stress nowadays, right? They're taking that D off of PTSD. Yes, there are some people that just really are highly impacted by whatever situation, the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, severe depression. There are some people who do get significantly challenged with post-traumatic stress from significant events. And there are people who, when you look at it, they actually will be able to be resilient. The majority of the people will be able to be more resilient. And then there's others that stay here and that can move and make a positive thing out of the challenges that they've had. They have post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress. And as I shared earlier, individuals or children, people who have been faced with significant challenge and overcome that tend to be more resilient. And so if you have children or have team members that are going through some challenging times, acknowledge that can be an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for learning. I love what Gary Ridge of WD-40 says. He says it's not about failure, it's about learning moments, right? How do we grow? How do we learn? And what can we do with learning moments? So how human beings react to extreme adversity is normally pretty distributed. And so the question for you and your team is, where are you, right? Are you in the downside? Are you on the upside? Are you somewhere in the middle when you're looking at developing resilience for you and your team? Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at balance, it's not just about taking care of yourself. It's also about taking care of your team and your people. And so if you break down, so does your ability to help others, right? So yes, first they say, as the classic saying goes on an airplane, is put your own mask on first. Take care of yourself first. Yes, when things are challenging, take time to meditate. When things are challenging, take time for a walk or a discussion with a close friend. If you can find peace and solace, then you can share that with others. So be purposeful. I always talk about the concept of being purposeful, just like the duck is purposeful, putting oil on their feathers every single day, every single feather. We need to be purposeful with our mindset, with our gratefulness and our gratitude, and our ability to be focused, our ability to be mindful instead of having a full mind. So whether it be your mindset or your health, getting enough sleep, of course, is huge, right? And researchers show that more and more getting enough sleep will also help you, help your health, help your balance, help your mindset, and help your resilience. So do what you need to do in order to take care of yourself, and encourage your employees to do the same thing. One of the final lessons as we look at this, and this lesson I call instinct. And I don't know about you, anytime I have ignored that voice in my head, that's what I like to call it, the voice in our head, it's the human instinct. It's there, right? Just like when ducks, when it gets cold up north, the ducks fly south, right? They need to know when to fly south. And the past couple of years has provided a lot of opportunity for us to, the classic word, right, pivot, to change our direction. When you think about what we need to do to fly south. How do we pay attention to that voice in our head? What do we need to do in our business? What do we need to do for ourselves? And even for me and in my businesses, I've had ups and downs. I've had great contracts, great clients, great companies. And once COVID hit, and that it was kind of like the one of the most significant challenges to my business was losing that big contract I mentioned earlier. And during COVID, I was thinking, what am I going to do? I actually fell into a pretty deep depression, and I couldn't pivot. I just couldn't find it within me to rally and try and grow the business. I guess you could say I lost a little hope for a while. And what was interesting is I had started thinking about, what can I do? I'm the primary provider for my family. How do I do this? How do I get through this yet another challenging time? And I had started thinking about finding a job, just thinking, all right, maybe I just kind of put the business on the back burner for a while and find a job to have a little stability, right? And it's knowing how to pivot. And a colleague called me and he says, "Hey, Maureen, he worked for Insperity, had been a performance specialist or performance consultant with Insperity for about 4 years. He says, I'm retiring. Are you interested in applying for my job?" And I'm thinking, right now, yeah, I am actually. So I had to pivot, right? My instinct was it's time to change, and the business was put on the back burner. It's not totally closed, but it's on the back burner so I could shift and have some stability in my own life, right? And so if you're a solopreneur and thinking about how do you survive, do you still have it within you? Listen to that voice in your head. Listen to the messages and pay attention to that. How can you pivot, whether it be doing more networking, growing more opportunities like I did at the beginning when I was launching my business, or is it working with your team to say, how can we get more contracts? How can we really put ourselves out there more? How can we perhaps change our products and services so that we can be able to adapt? So as we say, know when to fly south, know how we have to adapt in order to be surviving the challenges that we're facing. And sometimes even having that same conversation with your team. What are they doing? How are they doing? Do they need to adapt in their own career? If they're struggling and they're not performing well, maybe having that open and honest conversation is, what do we do in order to know when to fly south, to listen to the voice in your head, to follow your instinct? And so as we think about, as we start to, put a feather on this, so to speak, right? A quick summary on the model. Our connections are crucial, right? And it takes, as I say, it takes more than grit to stay afloat. So it takes all of these components. It takes that opportunity to truly connect, to truly be present with others, to build relationship. Don't try and survive this alone. It's not going to serve you well. And how do we adapt? What do we need to do in order to learn something, develop new resources, find new funding strategies? What are we doing to perhaps even find new talent that might help us adapt and change our business, our products and services? And then it's also about application. How do we develop the positive habits to continue to grow and develop the strategies and the habits that we need in order to be successful? And then there's the balance. We need to find the balance for ourselves and for our employees so that we can take care of ourselves, build our mental health, build our psychological health, build our capacity to really take care of ourselves in the midst of the challenge that we're facing. And then we look at perseverance, right? Yes, we do need grit and tenacity. Yes, we do need to have that stick-to-itiveness and know when to focus our perseverance, know when to really concentrate on our grit. But don't work yourself 15 hours a day, because that's not going to serve you well in the long run, right? So it's that balance of perseverance and harmony. That's what's going to help us get through. And then we think about our instinct, right? How do we put that together? And how do we truly listen to that voice in our head? That's the full model. And then let's talk about a couple more concepts. When we look at the individual factors versus the environmental factors, the full model of how we truly build our resilience, how do we truly build resilient businesses, resilient teams? It's a yes and, right? It's the individual factors of your team members, of you, of what are you doing to develop yourself and your own resilience? What are you doing to help your team members develop their individual capacity for resilience? And then it's also that environment. How can we create a positive environment? It says here, resilience is the ampersand, right? In between the person and the context. It's what are the factors that shape our individual resilience, and what are the factors that and the traits that really look at the environmental factor, the environmental context, right? It's both creating an environment and a place where people can be successful and building the capacity for them to be successful as well. So as we start to wrap up, and we'll open it up for some Q&A, is a reminder that ducks aren't hatched waterproof, right? People aren't born resilient. We do need to take action in order to be purposeful, to build our resilience and to stay afloat. A couple things that we're going to be putting into the chat there is some resilience resources. And here's an interesting story. I wrote this book called A Year of Resilience. Interestingly, I wrote this book February of 2020. It was published February on 2020, went on Amazon 1 month before the pandemic hit. Maybe I was a bit prophetic, or people say it was just all my fault. I wrote that and now the whole world went to heck. But so there's the book I wrote that's out there. But there's also a few tools and resources that you can use for your team. One is a resilience bingo. It might be something that you could incorporate and use with your team. Encourage them to connect, to develop, to perhaps work, to be perseverant, to balance, to pivot, right? And look to fill out that bingo card. It could be an activity that you do with your team. There's an infographic that covers all 6 components of the model that we're dropping in there as a resource as well. And maybe just as a visual reminder to stay afloat. One of the things I often do is give people rubber ducks. So if you ever meet me in person, make sure you ask me if I have any rubber ducks with me. It's become an odd brand that I've had. And put it somewhere, put that infographic somewhere where you can remember and be reminded about really being purposeful and building your resilience and building your capacity, as you say, to stay afloat. And so I'm going to open it up to any questions that might be out there, questions, comments.
Absolutely. So I'll get us started, and please, for our attendees, you can still submit questions. I love a framework, and I love the 5 points. And I think we'll ask some questions that kind of touch on each of those phases. I love the idea of Yappy Hour for connection. I know at the beginning of the pandemic that we were all really focused on staying connected, and I love that we should still do that, especially for those that are in a hybrid environment who don't have the opportunity to engage. I read a lot of things about cameras on or cameras off. So do you have a point of view on requiring employees to turn their cameras on?
I know that's been a huge discussion out there, because all of a sudden now we have this much opportunity to connect. And my preference is to encourage people to have their camera on, and if needed, to say, for example, I often use a Bluetooth headset when I'm in a Zoom meeting. And if I need to go get some water or heat up my coffee, if I'm working from home that day, it's okay to turn the camera off and still be present to the audio, but communicate that, right? Don't just don't just keep your camera off. And actually, yesterday in a webinar I was doing, I shared with this team, I said, often as a facilitator, when I'm doing a webinar, and this would translate probably to teams as well, is I often assume if they don't turn their camera on, it's because they don't want to be connected. They're being maybe they didn't do their makeup, and I make up all these stories, and I know I'm not the only one, right? We make up stories about why do they not have their camera on, and often they're not positive. It's a judgment, right? It's like, oh, are they disengaged? Are they feeling badly? And never, or maybe rarely, it's, hey, their tech isn't working, right? There's a challenge. In fact, my camera stopped working for about 4 or 5 days. Talked to tech support, they couldn't figure it out. And then all of a sudden it magically started working again. But it was, so I'd say when it comes to having the camera on, give people the grace and the flexibility to have it on or off. Of course, I think having that face-to-face, even if it's a virtual face-to-face, it does help you still feel connected, right? And I know it can also provide a little stress because you're always looking at yourself, right? And people have a tendency to look at, oh, how's my hair, right? How's my makeup? What's in my background, right? So often. Yeah. And so I think it's being able to have the conversation and give people the grace to have the option. But I think also realizing there is a benefit to being able to see the faces of our colleagues.
Yeah, definitely. I have worked remotely for over 10 years now with my boss, and it took the pandemic for us to actually start doing video calls. And I can't even imagine going back to just talking on the phone as often as we do.
It seems archaic, doesn't it?
It does, definitely. Yeah. So we're all experiencing change and, some companies or industries at a more rapid pace. And I love your idea about the individual traits and psychological flexibility and the psychological hardiness within the team. How can a leader identify that in their team to be able to address that, or even in the hiring process? Is that legal?
Well, I think we do it all of the time, but we don't always perhaps pay attention to it. And we don't pay attention to what's going on in our head. I think as far as how can we tell is pay attention to the cues, the social cues that are being given to us through body language, through tone of voice, through maybe a snarky attitude that people give us cues. Are we paying attention to it? And when we do see those cues, it's really about using our emotional intelligence. We're seeing someone who might be disengaging, who might be really tense, who might have a kind of a tense look on their face. And are we going to have a conversation to say, hey, I've noticed that you seem a little stressed lately. Is everything okay? Right? And creating the environment to where we can be okay with having that conversation. When it comes to the interviewing process, it's harder to call someone on it in the interview. Hey, you look stressed. Well, no, we aren't going to do that. And often people are stressed in the interviewing process. But I think paying attention to those social cues as well, using those behavior-based questions that really can get to real life examples and real life stories about someone's experience, I think can be indicative of how they might handle situations. Like I remember when I first started in corporate America at SeaWorld, oddly enough, we would ask people, tell me about a time you solved a problem, and how did you handle that? What was the solution? What was your process? What was the result? And so having a conversation, if problem solving or handling stress is an important part of a job, ask relevant questions about that might give you some indication of how do people truly handle stress or handle problem solving situations.
Yeah. Are you a believer in assessments? Throughout my career, that between StrengthsFinder or PI or DISC or any of those, can any assessments like that offer insights into someone's psychological hardiness?
I don't know if they actually, I think yes. I'm thinking yes and no. Do they truly measure psychological hardiness? I guess you can infer that. But I actually love utilizing assessments, whether it be DISC or the Strengths Finders or an EQ assessment, as a part of the conversation for team cohesion, for building resilience. And as far as measuring psychological hardiness, I think that's part of the conversation, right? But yeah, I think assessments can be truly helpful. And, there are people who love them, people who hate them. They're thinking, oh, they're all just contrived. But at the same time, it creates the conversation. It creates the environment to say, oh, you're different than me. And how can we leverage our strengths? How can we respect each other's differences and create more cohesion, as opposed to just wondering why I don't get along with this individual?
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be great data for managers to have, just to help, like you said, open that conversation. I liked what you said about environment as a really important part of the context, and I think that managers really control the environment in a workplace. So, in terms of the role of the frontline managers, what do you think the role of the frontline managers is in creating that environment, and what kind of tools or training should CEOs provide to help them with their teams?
Great question. I'm thinking of a CEO I met with yesterday. We were doing a deep dive into emotional intelligence for their team, and we had done a series of webinars for them. And I think in fact, I woke up thinking about this CEO this morning because he is one of the most consistent and positive people I've ever met. He always encourages his team. He's always very thankful and grateful for what the team is doing and what the team brings to the conversation. So I think from a frontline manager, it's honesty, it's openness, it's consistency, right? And being supportive. I mean, this individual, he is just constantly giving them ideas on perseverance, ideas on positivity, ideas on the importance of mindset, and shares his experience with them to say, here's a lesson I learned in my career. And he does this in a manner that's just so what's the word I'm looking for? Just so calm and welcoming, right? It's never, oh, you should do it this way. This is the lesson I had. It's, wow, it's, let me share with you something I learned, and maybe this will be helpful for you. And so I think understanding that the frontline manager has a role in the culture of the team and the spirit of the team, and never forget that, right? Never forget that as a CEO, the culture of the organization comes from the top. That CEO drives culture, but that frontline manager drives the culture of the team. And never underestimate the power of your attitude on your team or your organization. It can make it or it can break it. It can make it a really great place to work, or it can make it a really challenging place to work. And that's up to how you manage yourself as a manager.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask about your thoughts about the transparency for leaders in sharing their stressors or experiences, because you mentioned being purposeful, but sometimes authenticity or transparency means sharing some vulnerabilities and stressors. But is there a limit? Is there a balance in your point of view?
Um, yes, actually, and that was a conversation we had yesterday about authenticity. Because authenticity, some people are so authentic that they think it's okay to be a bully, for example. I'm just being myself, right? Or they're a bull in a china shop and they get angry and make a big scene, and then they go back and apologize. So there's authenticity, and then there's how can you truly be genuine, right? Because sometimes being so authentic that we are offending people, that we're hurting people, that we're sharing things, that we're so transparent that maybe it's actually not appropriate to be that transparent, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
the discussion is, how can you be authentic and genuine? And sometimes you still need to adapt to that situation, right? You're not going to tell a customer off, for example, because it's not appropriate. And you might feel like it, that might be really authentic, but it wouldn't
Right.
be appropriate, right? And so I think it's understanding that transparency and authenticity needs to be framed within the context of the situation. If you are struggling, maybe it's okay to share that to a certain extent. If you're angry, how can you manage your emotional intelligence so that you can have more of a proactive conversation instead of a reactive upset to a trigger that might have set you off.
Right, because we all hear a lot about the triggers and the things that put us in the reptilian brain as opposed to our problem-solving brain. Do you have any favorite things? I know Shirzad Shameen talks about, PQ reps and managing your saboteurs. Are there any favorites that you have?
I think for me, the one I like to really kind of come back to is that idea of perspective, is to stop and breathe. And using breathing is very helpful, but stop and breathe before you react to something that's a trigger, and pay attention to the triggers. I think so often people really don't think through what their triggers are. And it's not until perhaps they have a career limiting move where they lose a job because of how they handled something. So I
Yeah.
think being able to have that self-awareness for, these are my triggers and what are my actions going to be? How am I going to allow myself to be more responsive instead of reactive? And so taking that time to have a quick breath if needed, right? And being aware, I think that the tool I often use in that breathing space, if you would, is the ladder of inference, and making sure that we understand that there's a trigger and we have thoughts and feelings about that trigger, and then we can take action. But if we really manage our thoughts and feelings effectively, we can actually have a better result. So the ladder of inference is a tool I often use when teaching emotional intelligence or teaching people to learn to manage themselves and the triggers that they have.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our conversation today. So thank you so much for sharing your insights, Maureen. I know that managing stress and burnout and that resilience has been a big topic for our members in really thinking about how they can manage through uncertainty. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be with you, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.
Thank you
Remember
so much.
to stay afloat out there.
Definitely. Well, to help you stay afloat, we'll be sending a link to today's recording and the slides and some of the shared resources early next week. So we welcome you to join us for more upcoming webinars. Next week on Friday, July 29th, we'll be joined by attorney Hillel Presser, who will dig into market volatility, raising rates and recession, asset protection in a down cycle. On August 5th, we have Andrew Adeni, author of The Circle Leadership, who will share insights on how to develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for your organization. And details are coming soon for a member roundtable on August 12th, where 3 Vistage members will share their best practices for hiring. You can find more information and register for these webinars at vistage.com/webinar. That's vistage.com/webinar. And finally, for our members, if you have not yet had the opportunity to listen to our July 8th session with the legendary CEO of Boeing and Ford, Alan Mulally, that recording will be available through October 9th on My Vistage. Thank you so much for your time today. Everyone be safe and be well.